Hi everyone, we're back from the National Indian Students Union, and today we have none other than the extremely charming and the extremely proficient Dr. Shashi Tharoor with us. We'd like to thank him very much. Welcome, Dr. Tharoor.
Nice to see you,
Sanam.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Tharoor is here with us today at the Warwick India Forum, where he's speaking on India's growth story and its development going forward. I thought I'd bring Dr. Tharoor to all our members today to give you some insights on how Dr. Tharoor sees India is making its way forward, leaps and bounds that are still to cross, and a special message for all NISU members. So, I just start off, Dr. Tharoor. In terms of Modi ji's vision for India just now and the grand India vision, which is all around Make in India, and also the fact that we can supply skilled labor, teachers and nurses in particular, to the rest of the world, do you think the underlying skills gap that we have, where 500 million people are still uneducated and illiterate, is that a really practical vision, and how far off do you think that vision we are currently?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with the objective. The problem is it is indeed far removed from current reality. Before we can talk about providing teachers to the rest of the world, we have to provide teachers to ourselves. There's a serious faculty shortage in a number of our institutions. Even the IITs have expanded beyond their capacity to attract and retain quality faculty. So we are in danger of undermining our own educational system because of a shortage of qualified teachers. And the number of teachers who pass, the number of applicants who pass the teacher eligibility test that the government administers is so embarrassingly low that we have a real problem there. So the diagnosis is right. We need to develop skills. It was the same diagnosis that my government had, so we don't fault the present government for its diagnosis. But I would stress that what's essential for us to do is to ensure that these skills are developed across the board. You mentioned teachers, but why should a nation of 1.2 billion people have a shortage of certified masons or plumbers or auto mechanics or electricians? You know, we need to have all kinds of skills developed. Blue collar, white collar, no collar, and make sure that people are actually in a position to earn a respectable living and contribute to a changing economy.
And so typically the Indian mindset is traditionally academic, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we want doctors, we want engineers. But how do you bring about this mindset change where it's respectable, like you correctly said, to be a plumber or be an electrician? How do you bring that about?
That's actually a huge challenge for us, because you're right, everybody's ambition is a sarkari naukri, a government job with a comfortable sort of white-collar salary, pension, guaranteed retirement, guaranteed no firing, and an opportunity to push files all day and have coffee breaks or tea breaks. That's the limit of most people's ambitions, and that's wrong. I believe it's changing. I think our country, there's more and more entrepreneurial spirit coming into people's minds and behavior patterns, and there's also, I think, personally, a greater willingness to recognize that you can make a respectable living doing other things. Initially, it hasn't been plumbers and electricians, it's been sportsmen. So people who wanted their children to study engineering or medicine are now no longer preventing them from going off to try and become cricketers, because suddenly, you know, they realize that a cricketer can bring far more wealth into the family than a doctor and engineer can. Similarly, I think if we ensure that people with a good quality certificate in plumbing, in masonry, in whatever else, gets the kind of salary that actually is better than being a low-grade, lower divisional clerk in a government office, that will make it more attractive. In a country like Germany now, I was just talking to somebody, we had some German parliamentarians visiting, and my committee, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, received them in Parliament. And I was talking to one of the people there, and she was saying, one of the members of Parliament in Germany, that for her as an MP, getting a plumber to come to her house when she has a problem is such a big deal. She rates the MP far higher, and she pays him more than she herself would be able to afford to get. Now that's the sort of culture that will come about if economic rewards are commensurate with the needs in our society. By the way, one of the reasons we have a shortage of certified masons and plumbers is they've all gone off to the Gulf, where they are paid more money. So, you know, we simply need to produce more of them. So our market can absorb them, and where we export labor, we can absorb them too.
Very well said. And then, on that note, actually, since we are all people of the diaspora, we are living outside of India. Some of us go back, a lot of us don't, a lot of us are PIOs, people of Indian origin. What role can the diaspora play potentially in bridging or accelerating the path towards achieving this grand India vision?
Well, it's a tough one to answer, frankly. I used to be a diaspora member myself, not exactly because I didn't take that leap of the imagination that emigration entails. I happen to be working abroad, but for a very long time. Almost 3.5 decades I was outside the country. And I must say that for me now, looking at the diaspora's earnest desire to help, the honest truth is the best way you can help is by coming back, bringing your expertise, your investments, your talent, your education into the national effort. If you can't do that, you want to remain abroad and help India, then it's kind of long distance help and the options are much fewer. You can obviously give assistance, charity, investments. You can, if you're well-heeled enough, you can start businesses in India that you can manage from wherever you are abroad. But I think it'll be idle of me to pretend that somebody sitting abroad can have the same impact as somebody sitting at home. What you could do is support good causes in India, and not just political ones. And a lot of our NRIs seem to think that if they go and cheer for a visiting Prime Minister, they've done their bit for the nation. I think there's a lot more that can be done.
Absolutely. And just on that note, so we were at the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas recently, and we were talking about how the skills gap can be bridged if we were to use the expertise of, for example, students who've gone abroad, they've trained at global institutes, they've worked and they've got this global experience, global academic intellect as well. Why can't we as a country encourage them to come back and actually work for the government and work in sectors like international relations, where frankly speaking, India doesn't produce the highest produced?
Yeah, there is, I agree, there's a limitation in our system that, for example, to work for the government, you need to go through the civil service exams and all of that. I've been battling for some years now on the foreign service side, saying that increasingly we're getting the wrong sorts of people into the foreign service, and that what we need to do is open up these exams to NRIs. Obviously only Indian citizens, because you can't be represented abroad by a foreigner. But the Indian citizens who live abroad, who've grown up abroad, whether it's in Dubai or Kuwait or Muscat or Paris or London for that matter, or Singapore, are people who know how to talk to foreigners, probably picked up foreign languages, are exposed to the way in which the rest of the world thinks, lives, behaves. They've probably traveled much more, they've seen much more of the world. They could be very, very good effective representatives of India globally by comparison with somebody who's got into the foreign service because he or she couldn't get into the IAS, the police, the customs and revenue, all of which apparently most of them prefer to being a diplomat. So I felt that we should reach out to. There's tremendous resistance in our system, and our system has not agreed to expanding the foreign service exam in this way, or even to having a separate exam that tests these kinds of qualities for a diplomat. So the resistance in our system is a problem. I wish we had the kind of system where you folks could just come back in. At the very elite levels, very top levels where PM can make an exception, it's happening. So Professor Panagaria from Columbia has just been dragged in to head the Niti Aayog. There's an example of using a foreigner's talents, but the 90% of young people who are willing to come in for a couple of years, work in the Telecoms Commission or work in the Ministry of Education or whatever, they don't get a chance to do that. And I would love to see our system becoming flexible enough to accommodate that.
Interesting. And speaking of systems and flexibility, as someone who's essentially the pioneer of social media in India, right? The first dude almost to get 10,000 followers on Twitter, the first one to cross 100,000 as well. How do you think social media has, we all know it's impacted the elections and significantly impacted them, but do you see that role evolving in the future, and how do you see it progressing?
Right. By the way, I'm glad you stopped at 100,000 because I got overtaken before the 1 million mark by a whole bunch of Bollywood stars. and I think before the 2 million mark by Mr. Narendra Modi. So 10,000 and 100,000 is the list of the limits of my precedent setting. How can we use social media to do what, sorry?
How do you think it's actually impacted the political landscape?
Oh, it has
enormously. How do you think it will change?
It's already enormously impacted. There are 2 or 3 things to be said right away. And I've described this in much greater detail in my book, India Shastra, which has just come out. But first of all, practically everybody's on it, everybody in politics, with very few exceptions. And one of the reasons for that is it's an unparalleled means of communication to an educated mass audience. Secondly, and this is still contentious, but it's worth looking at this, there was a study that said that in something like 180 constituencies in the previous election, I've not seen a study for the 2014 election, but in the 2009 elections, in 180 constituencies, the gap between the first and the second, the winner and the runner-up, was smaller than the number of social media users in that constituency.
Interesting.
So had the losing candidate made a convincing appeal on social media, he or she might have changed the result of the election. That was the purpose of the study. It was a very interesting study. Third, at the same time, we're not yet where, for example, the US is. In America today, no one bothers anymore. They can just announce a rally on Twitter and people will show up. They can put it on Facebook that 4:30 at such and such place, candidate so-and-so is coming, there'll be 10,000 people there. You can't do that in India. You still need your megaphones and your jeeps and your people going door to door and all of that, because we still haven't reached that stage. But I think the big change will come when the communications revolution reaches the mobile phones, when you really have 4G everywhere, and it becomes easier and faster and cheaper to connect to the internet. Then the current internet penetration rate, which is somewhere between 13 and 15% in India, that's only 13 to 15% of our population has regular access to the internet. That will be transformed into 60 or 70% because already in a few years' time we're looking at 90% of our population having mobile phones. And once it's that easy to go on the net, they'll all be, and most of them will go on social media. I mean, why do you want to go on the internet? Various things. One of them is communication with people. So then you will find it playing a much more impactful role in politics. It's already begun, it's going to grow, and I think eventually it's going to be decisive as it is in other democracies.
And speaking of decisive democracies, where do you think India is now headed? Because previously, I know you've made the comment that India is a very highly developed economy, but in an advanced state of decay. Do you think that's still true? Is that changing? Where
that was written
ahead?
25 years ago, Sanam. It was in the opening paragraph of my novel, The Great Indian Novel, and you must allow the satirist the privilege of poking fun at his own country. But first of all, it's no longer true, because already with the liberalization of 91 and the transformations, India has been reviving rather than decaying since then. And secondly, it always was meant to be a sentence in a satirical novel and not a serious commentary in an op-ed piece or whatever. Having said that, I still think that there are lots of indications of decay around, particularly institutional decay, entrenched bureaucratic problems, all of these things, which we do need to overcome. I welcome the fact that some of those in power today seem to be impatient with these things and that they want to see real change. We have far too many unnecessary procedures. I also joked in The Great Indian Novel, by the way, that one of our legacies of British rule was the Indian bureaucracy, which has elevated the whole business of bureaucracy into an art form, as well as the most crippling of Indian diseases. So we need to get out of all of that and change. By and large, I would argue that India is very much reviving and moving upwards. But we are poised in a very interesting set of options. Demographically, we have a hugely attractive advantage. A young population, more than 50% under 25, 65% under for the world, the labor exporters for the world, all of that. That only works if you can actually educate and skill these folks. If they don't have the education or the training to take advantage of what the 21st century has to offer them in India and abroad, then the same demographic advantage could become a demographic disaster. It could be a nightmare. Look what we've got with the Maoists in so many of our 165 districts. We've had incidents involving Maoist violence, which means what? I mean, these are undereducated, unemployed, unemployable young men who feel they have no stake in this economy or in this society. They're not going to get any jobs there. 1,000 rupees and a Kalashnikov, or even a rifle for that matter, is a viable means of making a livelihood for them and giving them some meaning in their lives. Now that's a very sad and dangerous situation, because there will always be enough misguided people who will find amongst this legion of unemployed young men recruits for various dangerous causes. So we have to get education and skill training right, not only as a socio-economic objective, but as a national security objective in our country.
Absolutely. And speaking of security, Dr. Tharoor, women's security and female security is a huge issue in India.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's shameful that the capital of our country is known as the rape capital of India.
Yeah.
What is it that's lacking? Why can't we put CCTVs every 2 minutes, the way other economies, like the UK, for example, have?
Well, CCTVs are happening, I understand. Mr. Kejriwal has won an election in Delhi, promising 15 lakh CCTVs around the city. And CCTVs, better lighting, more effective police patrolling, all of those things can and should be done. And I've been clamoring for this myself in repeated articles and statements. But there's one thing that we need to do. My late wife would always say this, and that is to educate our boys from a very young age to respect women. And I think that this is so important, because all these institutional things are preventive, right? But the best prevention is changing people's minds.
Absolutely.
and that if, as long as we don't create legions of young men who see women as objects, and particularly who prey on vulnerable women to fulfill their baser needs, we will change our society. But that must start early, must start in school, and must also be reinforced at home.
Absolutely.
And that isn't happening enough, particularly, I'm sorry to say this, in northern India.
Yeah, no, understood. And finally, is there a message you'd like to give all the NISU members and alumni and young professionals all over the UK?
Well, my message would be, you're all folks who've come to the UK. For the most part, I guess, you've come from India, and therefore there's a chance you might go back to India. My personal view is do what I've done, which is do as much as you want to in the West, learn from it, profit from it, put your savings in the bank if you must, but then try and go back, because India needs you. And I believe India needs more and more people with a truly international experience and mindset, and the kind of learning and education you can get here. So good luck in your studies, be happy and be professional and fulfilled, but never forget where you're from. And every time you look in the mirror, remember there are more like you waiting for you to go back there and do something with them and for them. Thanks very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much.